Hello, valued viewers. This is Talking here on WESN, your content capital, where we try to speak about the important issues of the day, issues we hope are important to you here at home and those of the diaspora abroad. Now, Sean Michael Small here, flying solo, until we welcome the good lady herself, my co-host Keita Shah. He's not available today. However, this is not the last of Keita that we have seen. Don't worry, don't worry. However, said that twice in a row. That's a bit redundant. In the meantime, a couple of things that I want to address from yesterday's call-in segment that I wasn't able to answer, particularly since one of them was a direct question. First, though, just want to speak about the situation as one caller brought it up with regards to the cargo ferry. Once again, concerns over the cargo ferry situation, because it is a major lifeline to Tobago. Now, those who don't know, essentially speaking, the cargo ferry docks at the cruise ship complex. This was not always the case. Boats like the Warrior Spirit and the Superfast Galicia and all of those boats, they used to dock next to the fast ferries. Although now that we have 3 fast ferries, I believe, at any point in time, I think one of that berth is taken up by 1 or 2 of the fast ferries. Now, I don't know exactly why the Cabo Star has to dock at the cruise ship complex, but it is. And this month, there's a period where 17 cruise ships are expected to come in. And during that time, Cabo Star will have to figure out somewhere else to dock to essentially load and to some extent offload, you know, in Trinidad, mainly load up goods to take to Tobago. Now, why does it have to be so? I don't know if it's with regards to the depth of the Cabo Star or the depth of the anchorage. It might be deeper at the cruise ship complex as opposed to the fast ferry berthing area. The fast ferries don't have that deep of a hull, being, for the most part, catamarans. They're shallow draft, I think, might be the best way to say it. I'm not a seaman. I'm not a sailor. The other thing, of course, is it something to do with the infrastructure capacity to load and offload? Why not at the terminal for the inter-island ferry service as opposed to the cruise ship complex? So all of those questions. Regardless, we are here. And there seem to be mitigating factors or strategies. People have stocked up in order to have enough reserves over the period. And they say the Galleon's passage could fill the gap. I don't know exactly how true that is, because they have a boat like the Spirit, which apparently was an American military transport vessel at some point. You know, we couldn't necessarily load that up with cargo just like that. To some extent, the construction supplies and all of that, kind of heavy-duty trucks that go on the cargo vessel to load that, I don't know if the Galleon's passage can handle that. With regards to food, I guess, yes, to some extent it can handle food supplies. So, 2 potential mitigating strategies. On the surface, it seems bad, right? And then if you dig just a little bit deeper, they have ways to mitigate it. But I think ultimately speaking, those mitigation strategies are compromises at best. They should not necessarily be something that we should have to rely on if we don't have to. And the question comes down to why exactly is the Cabo Star having to load and offload at the cruise ship complex? I don't necessarily know. Perhaps somebody out there knows, perhaps it was reported I just missed it, or perhaps we will find out. Why exactly does it have to be there for now this to happen? And it seems as though this didn't happen last year. I remember that the Cabo Star has been docking there for quite some time. When I had to go to Tobago a couple of years ago, I had to take my car, send it with the cargo boats, and I was kind of surprised, but I didn't think anything of it at the time, having to go so far out of the way, because I was accustomed to the Warrior Spirit docking to the left of where the fast ferries dock. The thing is, maybe we'll get away with it this time, but I do feel, though, that these are all short-term solutions. Even the cargo star docking at the cruise ship complex is a short-term solution because it's a cruise ship complex. It's technically not meant for that, right? And we want to encourage more and more cruise ship traffic coming to Trinidad and Tobago. So operating on a temporary solutions in the long run is bound to have issues. So what is the obstacle to solve the problem? I don't know. I just know that it's been going on for years. I don't know. Maybe this happened last year, December too. We just didn't know about it, but we're a bit more sensitive now to the cargo star being disrupted. Or maybe there's more cruise ships this December than last December, which would be nice in some respects, except at the end of the day, no matter how prepared Tobago is, this is bound to be an inconvenience, especially since this is Christmas time. Demand for certain things and for certain things that are seasonal are going to go up, which have to be brought in extra. And it's just more complicated for you to have disruptions in December of the cargo ferry, no matter how justified, and no matter what mitigation strategies you have. I think that's a bad look, as the caller pointed out. But it's also a potential for a lot of problems with regards to quality of life and the like. And it's one thing if this was the first year, but it's not the first year that the cargo star is operating from the cruise ship complex. So when is a solution coming? I don't know if you realize this, but when is a solution coming is a question that could be asked about a lot of things around TNT. A lot of things. Most of those things we don't even have an answer to what the potential solution might be, much less a time frame of when it might happen. You know, rare is the promise, usually empty, of something to happen. All right. The next thing I want to get into from yesterday, a caller called in and he asked, what is it about alcohol that people like to drink it? It was an interesting question. I guess he himself is not a drinker, or maybe he is, but he himself does not know the answer to that question. And it came out because we were speaking about alcohol consumption and other substance usage in TNT. And I said I would only be able to give my perspective. So my perspective simply is it varies a lot from person to person on why they drink. A lot of it is social, you know, peer pressure. Hey, sit, have a drink, we having a drink, whatever. I mean, we might think we have peer pressure to drink in TNT, but the peer pressure to drink in, say, Southeast Asian countries and their cultures with regards to respect and reciprocating and I toast to you, so you must drink the whole glass, etc., etc. It's a whole different ballgame. Now, there's also the fact that, look, moderate consumption of alcohol is fine, and in some cases even beneficial, like what they say with regards to wine, red wine, I believe in particular. Alcohol also is drunk at social events. In part, it helps people calm down, or at least perceive that they're able to be calmer. It helps people to relax. That's probably a better way to put it, whether it's psychological or actually physical. Of course, that same effect will then lead you to being drunk if you drink too much alcohol, etc., etc. So one of the issues, of course, is it's one thing to be very strict and control how much you drink and have one or two drinks, but it's not difficult to see where individuals might overdo it, especially with something like alcohol. It's easy to overdo, especially if you have a low tolerance. You haven't drunk a lot of alcohol at a time, so your tolerance used to be high, but it's low, or you've gotten older. And sometimes when you get older, alcohol just affects you harder than it used to. So there are a lot of things, but I guess at the end of the day, it's a lot of it is cultural. A lot of it is cultural. I don't know how much people actually like drinking alcohol. I myself don't care much for beer, but a lot of people love an ice cold beer. That's fine. That's fine. I prefer other drinks, but I only prefer it to a point. And at some point, I myself don't know. But I do believe it's cultural. And now the question that we have to ask is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something we need to lament? I don't know, because as I pointed out, there are other cultures as well. And rather than trying to strip it from our culture, I think there's something to be said about the overall lack of responsibility that aspects of our society kind of promotes or engenders, or we ourselves just lose sight of the requirements for responsibility. And slowly but surely, an inch turns into a mile. It's not you give them an inch to take a mile, but rather an inch turns into a mile. That's just human nature. And things happen. All right. Now, let's actually start off today's daily review. All right, so going through some of these things quite quickly. The first story today, well, there's been a new commercial agreement with regards to Atlantic LNG, which, from what I understand, it now sees all 4 trains, our nation has a stake, a 10% stake, whereas before I believe we had something like a 10% stake on train 1 and an 11% stake on train 4. The Prime Minister has made comments or statements praising NGC, praising the NGC, yes, and his own team, the Ministry of Energy, for the negotiations, but also praising BP and Shell, saying, well, look, here we have corporations that are willing to be generous because they could have hidden behind pre-existing long-term contracts, saying, well, contract says, y'all don't get piece of trains 2 and 3, and we stick into that. Now, this has apparently been a negotiation process that took 5 years. We don't necessarily have all the details with regards to were there any other concessions? Was it just a situation where the reality caused all parties involved? There was another stakeholder in Train 1, a Chinese company that bowed out. But the remaining stakeholders, was there circumstances that made this move make sense? Was this potentially a good sign, a long-term investment in TNT with regards to BP and Shell, saying, well, because there's implications that look further, exploration is going to continue despite the bidding rounds that we've seen recently, not seemingly so well subscribed to. It could be that the situation with regards to natural gas in the disputed territories is maybe making energy companies a little bit more hopeful that waters in Trinidad, within the Trinidad maritime borders, might still have untapped resources. We don't know. We don't know what it is. On the surface, it looks like a good thing for the country. I don't necessarily see anything to complain about, at least not yet. If there's any issues that you might see, call in and let me know. But so far, this seems to be a bit of a win. It further justifies, to some extent, the government's focus on the energy sector. However, we kind of said this about the Dragon deal, when the Dragon deal itself was, we got the license and Maduro at the time was willing, before the first set of disruptions and indications of unwillingness from the Venezuelan government. We kind of said that. So to some extent, we do have to wonder, what will be the opportunity cost, or where's the other shoe that's going to drop, or what have you with regards to this course of action, if that will happen. That's an if, it's not a guarantee, to be fair. All right, next story. This one is quite concerning because I actually read this wrong initially. And the United Nations Population Fund Director, Elizabeth Arnold Talbot, basically made the statement that there was an increase in girls under the age of 15 that gave birth in the region since COVID-19. So my first misreading was, I didn't quite get the under 15 part. I thought it was just teen girls with the first pass, right? The first glance, you kind of don't necessarily comprehend everything if you're not careful. So teen girls could be over 15, 15, 16, 17. 18 technically legal adult, right? But 15 to 17 are still minors. But no, that's not even included in this. The alarm bells here does not even include girls who are just a couple years minor. We're talking under 15. We're talking 14, 13, and potentially below. Now, at that point, it starts to become questionable if a young lady could get pregnant because, that's where puberty kind of starts around that time. There are some early bloomers, there are some late bloomers. Now, the other thing is the statement she made, and I hope that it was purposefully so, and I believe it was, I would be surprised if it isn't, since the COVID-19 pandemic. Which means that it didn't just happen in 2020 or 2021 or even 2022. It potentially might still be happening. Maybe not at the same rate. But it was a period of time. It wasn't just like a one-off thing. Because in between lockdowns, there were times when we were able to go out into the public, in 2021, 2022, etc., etc. So it wasn't all like a lockdown for 2 to 3 years. But the real thing is, if to some extent it's still happening because it's since the COVID-19 pandemic, so to whatever extent, and it might be a minor amount, but to whatever extent it's still happening, that implies that they're under 15 now, or they might have been under 15 last year, which means they were a year younger than that when whoever did whatever. And that's the other thing that we don't know. Who exactly are the fathers in these situations? Are they minors or are they adults? And one of the things coming out of this, there's a lot of concerns about education for young people and things like that. There's also concerns about the willingness to speak about it and not hide things. Because I could see very much that, traditionally you don't want your dirty laundry out in public, so nobody will talk about it, the family won't talk about it, which is fine, but it's one thing to not talk about it to friends and extended family and neighbors and acquaintances and co-workers and the like. It's another thing to not talk about it to the police. So that's one concern. Of course, the other thing again is properly educating young women about their rights, reproductive health, what can and I don't want to say what should be done, but what can be done if they find themselves in a situation, as well as educating young ladies at all of those tender ages, 14, 13, 12, about how to be aware of these situations and avoid them. But I think one of the things that was not said in the article, so I don't know if the director said it herself or brought it up, and I think it is, what about society that allowed this criminal act to happen? And of course, men, whether young men, older men, actually perpetrating these crimes. It concerns me, it's worrying to me, to some extent it disgusts me. They say that one of the things that made it easier to hide was the fact that, well, the kids were at home, online schooling. And this brings up now, I think, a new dimension to that whole COVID-19 lockdown, that whole situation with online classes. It's not just the fact that we had poor essay results, but it's also the fact that, look, to some extent, I don't know if society is ready for such a change in the dynamics of how we function, because all of a sudden now it's easier to hide things within the walls of the family home. And what did we speak about to ASP Arun a couple of weeks ago with regards to domestic violence? There's gender-based violence, yes, intimate partner violence, but domestic violence is not limited to that. Gender-based violence is also not limited to intimate partner violence. So, daughters, sisters, wives, well, in this case, we're not talking about wives, can be victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. So, there will always be, when we make shifts to complex things, the potential for unintended consequences, and this might be one of them. We had a pandemic, fine. We had to keep the kids away from school, fine. And now we have this report where since COVID-19, there are more under 15 girls giving birth. Unintended consequences. And when we do things, are we prepared to deal with those consequences? I don't know. I just know that we have a lot of complex problems, so we have a lot of potential for unintended consequences. However, we'll end things there for the morning. When we come back, we should be having the good lady herself on Talking Points. Situation in the region is continuing. Now, there's hope that it's not all bad. Stay tuned. We'll have more about that and other things later on. This is Talking About on WSN, your content capital. We'll be right back.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
It comes naturally to us. Unstoppable energy. We use it to manifest a future. A future where energy takes new forms and is used in new ways for all of us. The new age of energy is here.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movie Town, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Talking Point. And just before we get into the next segment, I was given a message by a good friend, ASP Arun, informing me, because I don't believe I was aware of this, with regards to intercourse between minors. That has its own different set of rules. It's decriminalized to some extent within certain age brackets, as opposed to an adult having intercourse with a minor. So now the question, of course, is, while I do still have questions on the age of the potential fathers that had intercourse with all of these very, very young ladies, implied to have happened based on the reports. At the end of the day, there's also the question with regards to, well, if two under 15-year-olds have intercourse and it causes a pregnancy, is our society ready for things like that? I don't know.
I just want to say just on that, maybe the lawyer and me, but I cannot say definitively, but anyone under 16, unless this is why these are allowed young ladies to get married at 16, because oftentimes they would get pregnant, and then the parents would give it permission, and if the parents wouldn't, then the magistrate could give that permission, but the parents wouldn't.
Well, but
there's something called statute. I'm saying generally, but under 16, it's something called statutory rape, and I don't think it applies only to women, girls or boys. It means under 16, you are not capable of giving consent. So it's both parties are not capable of giving consent.
Wow.
So I don't know what the whole outcome will be, but I know that is what we call statutory rape. And even if you said, yes, let's go ahead, the law says, no, you can't, because you are not of age to give that consent.
Yes, Arun, we need to probably speak about this even further with regards to the current situation. But again, concerns over the fact that under 15s having children, mothers, we know that's the report, but now if they're fathers as well,
that's incest also.
Well, let's leave that there.
Yeah,
Folks, of course, we have the good lady herself, as you have heard from her, former Minister of Finance and Internet Law, here to continue the discussion with regards to the whole dispute on Essequibo. And to start off, I think there are certain technical aspects that people might not necessarily be aware about with regards to some of the agreements and the attempts at solving the disputes in the past and how they were worded, which has implications to how we could possibly move on from here.
Especially for Trinidad and Tobago, where we are struggling with our natural gas. As we know, the situation is dire, and so has the Prime Minister said. So I'm not here to give any personal point of view on it, because I don't even know if I have actually reached that point. But I do know that it's perhaps the time may be that with all of this being in the news and dominating the news cycle, that perhaps this might be a good time or an appropriate time to address the issue. Well, I think all of us know, or most of us who have followed this know, that the sort of the origin of this whole dispute is from an arbitral award of 1899, when Ghana was British Ghana, so it was a colony of United Kingdom, and it was an agreement between Ghana, British Ghana, United Kingdom representing British Ghana as one of its colonies, and Venezuela. And the whole issue was the boundary dispute, and the effect of that would have been that 2/3, if the boundary disputes, if they were agreed to, would end up with about 2/3 of Guyana ending up being owned by or being reclaimed. Venezuela says reclaim, Guyana says annexation. But I wanted to move on a little bit from that because the basis of the discussion, and we've all said it, including myself, have said that when it came to coming to some sort of resolution, because it wasn't recently that this matter reared its ugly head. When British Guyana became independent, in fact, if you look at the Article 33, which is the Geneva Agreement of 1966, a signatory is George Burnham, because they were about to become a republic, about to become an independent state. So that the whole kerfuffle, to use a word that's been used by others, really was started even in 1966. And then, of course, it really took up speed all along the years. It has never been a situation where there has not been skirmishes along the border between, the so-called border between Guyana and Venezuela, which is, of course, a subject of disagreement. But I think it really came to a head around 2013 because of the discovery of natural gas in the Essequibo River and also in the maritime waters of the Essequibo River, and it's tremendous resources of natural gas. And as a consequence of which, persons then referred to the Article 33 of the Geneva Agreement. Now, when I went back and looked at it, I began, and I am not taking a position, please, I'm not, maybe it's the lawyer in me that is talking here, but when I looked back at the Article 33 and read it myself, which in fact is right in front of me, and in particular, the agreement, the Geneva Agreement of 1966, I should say, Article 4 in particular, it talked about the mechanisms for finding a resolution, a mixed commission. If that didn't work out, that the parties had to agree to an international forum. They both had to agree to that. And this was the part that I think was of note. If that didn't happen, and this is Article 4, Article 4.2, after they received the final report, the government of Guyana and Venezuela should not have reached agreement regarding the choice of one of the means of settlement provided in Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, that's a separate document, and that is the one in which you're looking at ways you can resolve disputes between countries that have international implications. And they set out a number of ways in which one could come to that resolution: arbitration, negotiation, and judicial intervention. But they don't tell you one, they give you a slew of choices. So they refer to the Charter. They shall refer the decision as the means of settlement to an appropriate international organ upon which they both agree. So there's requirement for agreement, right? Or, that doesn't work, which is what did not happen, or failing agreement on this point to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, this is where the controversy may arise. If the means so chosen do not lead to a solution of the controversy, the said organ, or, as the case may be, the Secretary General of the United Nations shall choose another of the means stipulated in Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations, which I just referred, and then it goes on to say, and so on, until the controversy has been resolved, or until all the means of peaceful settlement there contemplated have been exhausted. So reading it just from a legal point of view, it seems to me that even the Secretary General understood that if he chose the ICJ, which he did, International Court of Justice, if that did not lead to a resolution, it will go and so on. What does and so on mean? And so on means, well, we have to continue this whole process, which is what Venezuela has said. They said they never agreed to the ICJ being the final arbiter. And they have used to strengthen their argument. I am not, let me just be clear, I am not here supporting Venezuela. I'm just putting some perspective on it. And the other arguments that they have made to strengthen their position on that is the Port of Spain Protocol. Because in 1970, when the parties simply could not come to an agreement, they did agree that they would allow, and I had the actual wording, the government to promote cooperation and understanding regarding the border dispute, which was in abeyance, and the Parliament. And the thing about it was, whilst the Parliament of Guyana fully supported that, the Parliament of Venezuela absolutely did not. I was very critical of that as being a means of settlement. So I don't know if one could say that Venezuela had agreed even to the Port-of-Spain Protocol. Finally, in 1983, where nothing had happened out to the 13 years, they abandoned that as a form of settlement. So this is the arguments that Venezuela has been using. One, that they're saying that Article 4 in the Geneva Agreement did not definitively say that if it went to the ICJ, that was the end of it. It did not say that. And secondly, if it had, why the Port-of-Spain Protocol? If there was already, it's like saying you're going to the Privy Council, but you're going to the CCG. I mean, which one are you going to? The Privy Council or the CCG? I think that's one of their major arguments. The other argument they have put forward was when the arbitral award was made in 1899. I don't think anybody was looking at maritime waters because I don't think anybody knew about natural gas and oil at that time. And one of the arguments that Venezuela has put forward is that in any event, the arbitral award does not delimit the maritime waters, and where does it end in terms of Guyana or Venezuela. And why is it so important? Because that's where a lot of the natural gas is. So that's about three of the arguments that they've put. The Port-of-Spain Protocol, the wording of Article 4 of the Geneva Convention of 1966, and even looking at the Charter, UN Charter, Article 33, does not tell you how to settle. They just give you mechanisms. And the fact that Venezuela has gone on record to say that they never agreed to anything, and if we had, why the Port-of-Spain Protocol? The final thing I wanted to say, just being, trying to be even-handed, I hope, is that when Venezuela announced, now I don't know if I don't read it correctly, but oftentimes when I read about the referendum of December the 3rd, an adjective is always excluded, non-binding. I don't know if you know, I mean, non-binding means we're not saying whatever the referendum outcome is that is going to bind us as how we will move forward. I do believe that that referendum had more to do with internal politics because clearly Maduro has lost a lot of support. So many of his people have left the country and they have an election coming up in 2024. And many countries are very skittish about doing referendum or referenda because sometimes it is maybe an indictment, or it says what the people think of the government. So a government is careful, and we saw that with the going to the CCG. We've seen Kitts, we've had St. Vincent do that, and they were not successful in getting the people to say, let's go to the Privy Council. So countries are skittish about that. So in my understanding about that December the 3rd referendum, which is non-binding, I mean, they have, I think Venezuela was within its, when Ghana tried to stop it, I don't know how they could. You're dealing with an internal matter, the sovereignty of a country, and it is non-binding. It's not saying, they are trying to test the temperature of their people and do as many countries have done. Thatcher did it with the Falklands crisis when she was about to, according to reports, about to lose her position as Prime Minister. And when she was able to rally both Labour and Tory and everybody in Britain around one common enemy, which was Argentina with the Falklands crisis, she became a great hero. So I don't know if that is a political strategy, but I don't think that one can look at that as any effort. In my view, because of the words non-binding, it was more an internal political maneuvering by Mr. Maduro, in my opinion, so that the Ghana running to the ICJ to try to stop it. I don't think, what was the point of that? I don't know, I can't quite figure that out. Okay, so that deals with that. Now, we've reached now where, what is going on now, things have ratcheted up a lot. And now, some people may be of the view that maybe United States would like an opportunity to go into Venezuela. Venezuela is the largest supply of crude oil in the world, and I think the 8th largest in natural gas. And with all the talk of getting rid of fossil fuels, it's still very important. A lot of refineries are being built. Ghana is building one as we speak. They say they don't want ours. This is old and rusty, and they don't need it, and they don't want it. And they're getting one from the Dominican Republic with an MOU. They say they don't want our trains because they say they're old and they need a lot of repair. They don't want it. They don't also want to put a gas line to bring oil, natural gas from Kaita to Trinidad. They say too costly. So our relationship with Ghana, let's just say it perhaps has not been the best in the past few years, and now we are faced with a very critical thing which we've spoken about with the LNG. So coming back to the December 3rd referendum, you see that there has been an increase of presence of the Guyanese military along the border, the so-called border. Well, what is considered their border? No, Ghana.
Ghana?
Yeah, Ghana has a lot of, and Dr. Ali, there's a picture of him sleeping in a hammock with his soldiers.
Well, I mean, a lot is relative when compared to Venezuela. It's not.
No, but I'm just telling you,
right.
He's giving support, moral support, right? And of course, Ghana has rejected Venezuela's outcome of their referendum, which says that they should reclaim, and Ghana is saying you are annexing. But the key to all of this is the presence of the United States. And the United States has said that it hasn't done anything, but you certainly feel the presence, and the rationale is that they have all companies, ExxonMobil, companies with significant investments in Ghana, and they're going to protect it. I doubt very much. I am not a soothsayer. I cannot say what is going to happen in the future, but I doubt very much that Venezuela is going to go to start any war with America. I think America probably, it's a sovereign state. They had the elections, may have had a low outturn for the elections, but as far as we know, unless there's evidence to the contrary, and there has not been any evidence to the contrary, that it was not a democratically elected government. So for any country to go into a sovereign autonomous state, on what basis can you justify something like that? However, now with this whole issue regarding ExxonMobil and America saying they have to protect its resources, I doubt very much that Venezuela will take that, maybe what you will call a sort of a poke in the bear kind of thing. Oh. I don't think they're going to go for that. I think they understand very well that they are outgunned literally with that. So I would leave it there at that point, because I'm sure you have questions you would like to
first of all, a lot of people might be tempted to say, oh, America's attention is split by a lot of different things. And to some extent that is true, but we need to understand two things. One, America is one of the few countries in the world designed to have a large enough military to go out and deal with multiple crises at once. Southeast Asia is not neglected because of the Middle East, etc., etc. And they don't need anywhere near the same level of assets to potentially intervene in Venezuela as they would, say, if they had to intervene in a situation with China. That's a whole different level of requirement there, right? And complexity. Of course, ironically, we might get caught up in that as well as a twin island nation near the situation, right? But with that said, I think you're correct. Not only because we had this discussion yesterday, and then this morning I saw a video from our affiliate France 24, the Venezuelan. Well, we don't know how official her title is, but they say she is the opposition leader, Maria Machado. She has made claims that, look, the government and the regime is not that popular, and this referendum was a way to try to kind of get the population to kind of, look, blame them. That's the boogeyman, rally behind me, you know, be confident in me, and I could solve this problem, which, according to one report from a local newspaper, there are Venezuelans living in the region who disagree with the situation, and they've been apparently threatened by, you know, in various ways for their dissent, their disagreement for the whole referendum and the rhetoric coming out of Venezuela. So you have Venezuelan nationals who are right in the middle of the situation and disagree, and their dissent is being censored or suppressed, or they're getting some level of threats behind it. So while it's not necessarily like hard, stone cold evidence, you know, guaranteed that this is the truth, I think there's a lot to be said that, look, why are they making this an issue now? And do they really think that they could move ahead? Do they really assume that the United States and other Western nations will just sit back and say, oh, yes, you could annex land from Guyana? Because every time that you say that, yes, the maritime borders are also in question, well, to me, though, the maritime borders that Guyana claims is not out of bounds with regards to just how these things are generally done. You have your land, and straight out to sea, you know, you have an exclusive economic zone. And you might get some disputes, of course, on where that border lies, but Guyana's claims don't seem to be too far out of the norm or too extreme to say, oh, they overstepping to a great degree. I think Venezuela does find itself in a rock and a hard place because their economic zone is sandwiched between us and Guyana. But, I mean, I could be wrong, I'm not a maritime lawyer, but Guyana, there's no obvious issue, I think, with Guyana's territorial water claims. Of course, that's tied to the claims to Essequibo, which I understand by what you said there, the mechanisms for resolution don't seem to be totally clear-cut. And I do wonder if Venezuela even wants to get a final resolution. I think I did see Machado, I think she was actually calling to participate with the UN and the International Court. But I don't know if Maduro wants to do that, because if it, you know, as long as the issue is alive, he could potentially use it like the Falklands, like other things to rally the country behind him. But there's something to be said about Margaret Thatcher. How long did she remain prime minister? Or look at Winston Churchill. He was brought in for a crisis, and he was removed once the crisis was done.
Yeah, but I think, let me say this, I genuinely hold no brief for anyone. I just have to get my information from what we would call sources that are respected. But I don't think one would be being a bit, there's a lot of saber rattling going on, or saber rattling, but I do think that one has to be careful people's agenda. So, for example, with Maria Machado has been banned for 15 years from participating in the national elections. That decision that she was chosen to be the representative of the opposition, who, by the way, have had many disagreements. They can't agree. Some are socialists, some are neo-socialists, some are... They themselves have had so many disagreements. But it was not carried out by the equivalent, as I've said already, by the equivalent of our ECB Election and Boundaries Commission. So I don't know the authenticity of that. And secondly, that Maria Machado, what is she supposed to do? Obviously, she's going to say what she's going to say. What I do know is that don't underestimate Maduro, because where's Guaido? You hear about Guaido recently? You hear about him? When you asked me about Guaido?
One of the questions posed to her is, what might happen if Maduro's regime presents an opposition candidate that could basically split the vote?
But it's their country. But people don't understand this. Unless they are attacking another person's country, which I expect that they will not be so foolhardy to do that in the case of Ghana, no matter what they're saying. I think it's more politics, internal politics we are seeing being played out. The fact of the matter is, the reason that they have said that about Machado is that they've said that when Guaido, who won the National Assembly, that it was alleged that she was very much behind him being replaced as the president, and that was an act of treason. And apparently there is a recording. Now, she did not say much, but I think it was enough for them to say that she was sort of in cahoots. So I don't know if you know what treason is, but what I am saying to you, that election of Machado as the leader of the opposition was done not by the Elections Boundaries Commission equivalent, and on top of which, When Guaido won the National Assembly, I've said this already, what did Machado do? He took away all the powers from the National Assembly and created the National...
Maduro. Yeah.
Maduro. When Guaido won the National Assembly, he took away all the powers and created a national, I can't remember, something assembly, the effect of which was to take away all the lawmaking powers from the assembly, give it to this newly created assembly, of which had all the lawmaking powers, and according to the reports, a lot of the persons there were people who supported Maduro. And the final thing I want to say is Barbados, based on all the reports up to date, except Forbes. Forbes was the only one that gave a different take on it. But they seem to be saying that Venezuela is in a difficult place because with all their talk about how much oil they have and the refinery and so on, what they're saying is they have not really been able to move their oil production, refining of oil. Some say 650, another one said 850 barrels per day. But however you look at it, it is nothing near to what they anticipated it would reach. And the conversation is they're reaching a point where they are willing just to sell their crude oil and their natural gas. So I think Venezuela itself is facing a lot of, regardless of whatever arrangements they have been making, they themselves have some difficulties because of Biden's and Trump's restriction. Now, when you read it from Forbes, Forbes is saying the opposite. Forbes is saying that now that a lot of those restrictions have been removed, also you see what they're also saying with China, is that China was one of their main markets, the independent refiners. But they had a special deal with them where they were selling them the refined oil at very low prices. Now that Biden removed a lot of those restrictions, they are now having negotiations with China where they want to increase the price of the refined oil. So it's all so complicated. But I would say in essence, a lot of saber rattling. I doubt very much that Venezuela can afford on many levels to go into a war with Guyana. And that what it is more to deal with right now is shoring up his position as the president in 2024, which is just around the corner, of Venezuela, and using all the arguments that they can through his vice president in other words, to justify the position that they have taken. I think that's more what's going on. America is there waiting, I expect, for Venezuela to make one false move so that will then give them perhaps, I'm not saying they do want to, but it would give them an opportunity to do what they have not been able to do before when Guaido was there. So I don't know what to make of it. Well, but you know who's in trouble? Of course, we.
Well,
we are in trouble.
I won't be surprised.
When I say we, I don't want Trinidad to be.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if America actually is, to some extent, thinking, look, we don't expect Maduro to try to invade. Is he ready for an invasion? Yeah. And to the point where maybe they're not even preparing for the eventuality, depending on, they might know stuff that we don't know. But now,
I'm sure they do.
Right, so the thing is, though, I do wonder that Forbes report, if they're overestimating Venezuela, because one of the issues with the Venezuelan economy, from what I understood, take this with a grain of salt, I don't have a technical expert telling me this, right? This is from what I heard from people, from Venezuelans, is that
what these Venezuelans telling you that? These are the ones that had to leave. I mean, you have to be very careful. Okay.
But this is a long-term thing. With regards to the government, of course, privatizing the oil and gas sector, but then you have to understand, Chavez was from the military, so putting people who he trusted in charge of these agencies, I think, yes, you could look at a situation like China and Russia where the economy seems to be moving along as well as it should, or as well, not a disaster, right? But with regards to Venezuela, there was at least a point in time where certain aspects of their economy was being run by people who were not qualified to run it, but were politically reliable. So I do wonder if part of Venezuela's issues stems from that. It's basically the lack of meritocracy, but to a much greater extent. And Forbes might be overestimating. Just because they have it doesn't mean that they could make use of it.
And then Reuters might be
That is true.
One thing I learned, I did international relations, and you know, one of the things that you learn, and I always remember G.W. Fulbright, if I could just seem to be going a transgender, but it really isn't. He's, you know, he's the man that they have the Fulbright Fellowship, right. And he wrote a book on American foreign policy. He wrote it on the Bay of Pigs and the missile crisis. And one of the things he said, because I had to do that book in Form 6 many years ago, but I had to do that book, and it was an eye-opener to me, because what he was saying is that one of the difficulties with America, they do not understand other countries' cultures. They do not really understand how other countries' viewpoints, they see things from the lens of America. And he used as a good example, which was an international embarrassment for the United States, the Bay of Pigs uprising, when they felt that there was enough support against Castro that when they brought in people from Miami, who were persons that Castro had, you know, had, I don't know what the correct word is, but they were no longer living in Cuba, and they were disaffected, and many of them were big property owners and wealthy persons from Cuba. They felt that they would have had enough of that support, that when they went to the Bay of Pigs, that the people would have had an uprising almost organically, and the opposite happened. The people stood with Castro. And what the lesson that Fulbright gave from that was that America sometimes misunderstands the way the world looks at things. I have a feeling, if I did not go, but if I went to Al Jazeera as a source for this discussion, I have a feeling I'll get a different point of view. You have to be very careful. I am not taking a position, and I don't want anyone to say that I am taking a position. What I am saying is that when the discussion has happened, I don't hear the word non-binding referendum.
Yeah.
And I think those words are very important, because it tells you what was the objective of the referendum, as it is the objective of many referendum. I also have to remember that however you like it or don't like it, Maduro was the democratically elected president of Venezuela. You cannot go into another sovereign state because you don't like who is the president, right? They tried with Guaido, and Maduro obviously was found a way around it, and you hear nothing more about Guaido. They brought Machado. What do you think is going to happen to Machado? They banned her for 15 years. So I think at this point in time, there's a lot of saber rattling. There's a lot of, you know, each party trying to do the brinkmanship, and it's all in the hope that for Venezuela, that they will get the kind of support that they do need for the elections, and on the side of Guyana, that it will also be a uniting force for them against a common enemy that they're saying is trying to annex their country, and Venezuela is saying we are trying to reclaim what is ours. Meanwhile, guess who's caught in the middle of all of this?
Us.
Yes, because this is just one point I do want to make, and I do not know, because I do not have information at my disposal. So if the minister or the government says a pack of nonsense, well, okay, they can say that. But I will say that I do know that that oil in Ghana, in Venezuela, that oil in Venezuela is the largest support, 304 billion barrels of oil. That's what Forbes said that they have. Okay? And that natural gas, they still want it. And they're still dealing with it. And the fact of the matter is that as long as oil, the fossil fuels, continue to dominate the source of energy for whatever purposes, until we find a real, viable, global solution, Venezuela is still going to be a big player in the international scene. And we, that is Trinidad and Tobago, and I have said it before, and the Prime Minister said it to his credit, that he said that we have the equivalent of about 2.7 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day, which is far below what we need at 4.1. So even if, which I hope will happen, the Dragon field comes on stream, that's about 4 or 5 years from now. What's happening then? And a final point on that is this. If you notice, when they were talking about these deals, they kept talking about rather than buying and selling, which is what Biden was saying. We're not going to allow you to sell, buy natural gas from Venezuela and pay them in US dollars. You have to pay them in kind unless it's free and fair elections. But you're getting the feeling that Europe and Trinidad is part of it, are entering into what they call joint venture arrangements, which means that both parties, all the parties, are making an investment in the crude oil and natural gas and things, so that when profits are realized, the profits will stay in Venezuela, and those profits will be in, because the oil is US dollars. So I don't know if there's another consideration on the table, which our minister, which will be to his credit, if there is another way around this whole Biden thing, because I have a feeling they don't think they're going to have free and fair elections.
Well,
according to America.
And that's my concern, because while, yes, it's true that America does not understand the intricacies of different parts of the world, I would say that it also works both ways. And look, Venezuela themselves might not fully understand the perspectives, cultures, motivations, and decisions that the neighbors would make, America would make, the rest of the world would make. And they're doing what, to me, is a little bit of a risk, because the sanctions were just started to be lifted, and America is basically saying all we care about is free and fair elections. Now, so far, they haven't done anything to endanger that. But if this situation, if this saber-rattling goes a little bit further or goes too far, right, and then there are other things that spiral and expand because of that, I do wonder if the United States will be patient and silent, because at the end of the day, one of the things, the inconvenient truth that the rest of the world has over their disdain for American intervention is the fact that far too many countries around the rest of the world actually want American intervention.
You know, but maybe I am a cynic.
Didn't you yourself say it, that if anything were to happen, we would
But there's something called geopolitics. And I don't know if you're seeing what's happening with BRICS. I don't know what you're seeing what's happening with de-dollarization.
I'm not that concerned about it.
Yeah, no, you see, but you're not really concerned, but America is concerned.
And I'll tell you why, I'm not that concerned about it.
All I'm saying to you is this. I think we have limited knowledge, and we also have to go by what is given to us. And as we know, I don't follow the Hamas and the Israel thing. I don't follow it because I find it too heartbreaking. I don't want to give an opinion on it, but it depends on who's giving you the report. You go Al Jazeera, they'll tell you something else. You go to BBC, they'll tell you something else. Who you believe? So the point about it is, when you come and make these definitive statements about anything in relation to what, and by the way, when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. Unfortunately, America never has to study us. They will say Trinidad is in Jamaica still. We know much more about them than they know about us, because we have to, because they are the power center of the world. So we need to know America. America need to know us? Not so much.
Well, all I'll just say about this, yes, there's BRICS and there's the whole de-dollarization. At the end of the day, India and China are two of the biggest BRICS members. Maybe you could say India, China, and Russia, right? You know,
we have Iran.
Well, no, but I'm talking about size and population and economy size,
and power.
Right? And power, right? India and China are two of the biggest. Russia as well, right? Here's the thing: the biggest security concern India has right now is China. So I don't know if an economic bloc could really function if your main security threat is one of the members of your economic bloc.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You don't see that happening in politics? That didn't come about just like that. Listen, I do not have an answer, and maybe it's because of the cynicism that that is impacting me, and doing international relations, and also being very careful about what the media reports and how they report it. I don't believe that there will be any breakout of any kind of war at all. I do believe that thing was a referendum, non-binding referendum.
Yes.
I do believe
so he has a way out to
but it's also
to
get a sense of what was the temperature of his country in relation to an election. And I do believe that they are finding other ways to deal with the Biden
I think you're very right, because I think it's the age-old thing. Look, I need you to focus on, it's a distraction, focus on that, right? That's an issue be mad at that. Don't be mad at me. Support me because I will solve that. Is that even necessary for your life?
Set you free.
Yeah, exactly. Because to me, I'm pretty sure Essequibo is not going to make any immediate difference to the quality of life of Venezuelans, even if they were to get it. It's similar to Dragon, right? How long will it take for it to actually materialize? It's important to us, but my point is, it'll take time, even if...
But not according to your minister.
Folks, look, let's just take a short break, and when we come back, we'll open the phone lines right away. Stay tuned.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Site, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
It's Christmas time, and with your family you'll spend every evening watching a movie on WESN. The classics that fill your heart with merriment and cheer as we celebrate together the most wonderful time of the year.
This is my island in December.
This Christmas, WESN celebrates with you as the Content Capital brings the big screen classics. Gather your family and tune in to WESN from December 1st to 31st at 8 p.m. nightly for We Christmas Movie Classics.
Santa's coming to town. Santa! Oh my God! Santa here? I know him. I know him.
Only on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to Soccer, ladies and gentlemen. So now we open up the phone lines. There were some other stories I wanted to get to, but I couldn't get through them all. But the main topic today, of course, was, listen, all of the doom and gloom, and now after the referendum, we heard it from European media, American media. Oh my gosh, this referendum. But Karen pointed out one of the most important things in the winning of that referendum, non-binary. It's a clue, non-binding, sorry. Oh my gosh, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Non-binding, it's a clue that Maduro made sure that he had room to back off from this. And it's not a, we're committed, full steam ahead, we're taking this, we're seeing this thing through. So, of course, you could call it and have your say with regards to our own energy situation. We got We got news from well, with regards to the trains, Atlantic Energy being restructured and all of that, calling about other things. But we have our first caller from Diego Martin. Good morning, caller, you're on the air. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Sean Paul, I believe, and Mrs. the Honorable former Minister of Finance, Karen Nunes Teixeira. I want to talk about crises in our midst. And I want to talk about the Paria report, when we are going to get that. And at the same time, we are focusing on the Paria report. What about the debt of the gentleman in Naikwan? And what about the debt of the fellow in Wassa? Where are those reports? That tells us we have a crisis in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to industrial manufacturing. That tells me USHA is not functional. If USHA was functional, because I came from that sort of industry, manufacturing industry, they would have been doing surveillance audits regularly. And if there's an issue within an organization, you would have picked it up. The fact you had the Paria, and a year after, you ended up with the Naikwan. And then between all of that, you have WASA. These are not small organizations. And if the health and safety personnel within this organization is not functioning, then the CEO, who has the ultimate responsibility for health safety and the protection of all the lives, have to take the blame and has to be held account. And we are not doing anything about that.
Intercede
and I'm
on that?
waiting to hear somebody say something about
Yeah,
that.
because I want to say this. You're saying that OSHA has not done its job, and it's probably quite correct. But according to our law, a commission of inquiry is mandated by the government, and according to the law, it has to be given from the president to the prime minister. And according to the law, it is the prime minister who decides to release it. So all of what you are saying, and maybe it's those very same things that they do not want to come out into the public domain, because I think OSHA is a government entity. So what you should be saying, rather than talking about what OSHA did or OSHA didn't do, or what Naikwan did or what Naikwan didn't do, clearly they didn't do something right. But what he's talking is what we as citizens are entitled to is accountability and transparency, and that is what we are not getting. So I think you need to say, why is the government failing to release these reports for us to see exactly what went wrong? Because it's probably those very same concerns that you have that they do not want to come to the fore. And by the way, as you mentioned Commission of Inquiry, I can't help but mention that I want to say this. I was on 95.5. They go back on their records. I just so happened that I came on the same week that Mr. Manning died, but I came to say that they were not going to release it. I said on that show that I could bet my last dollar that the Prime Minister was going to make a lot of noise and be so outraged and talk all kind of talk. Of course, he cleared one person who wasn't even on a commission of inquiry. And I said it would never see the light of day because there are people on both sides of the aisle who it would reach things. So you need to put... So what I want to tell you, sir, is do not allow yourself to be deflected. What you have to say is the government has a responsibility to release these reports so that we, the public, can get an assessment of what went wrong. That is what you should ask for. And it is the Prime Minister who you should be addressing your comments to, not OSHA.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a caller from Chigones. Good morning. Calling on here?
Yes.
Morning. Go ahead.
To your guest there, Mrs. Teixeira, and yourself, Mr. Small. Mrs. Teixeira, let me congratulate you for your program on Monday afternoon in Power 102.
Oh,
very excellent on Petrotrin. And Mr. Small, as usual, you do excellent on your program.
Thank you, sir.
First of all, let me start by saying that in energy contracts, you have to issue what you call contractors all risk workmen compensation, which will take care of your workers if anything happened to them, and public liability, which will take care of the environment in which you're working if it damage anything. Now, the thing is, in these big companies like Petrotrin, NGC, NEC, Tesoro, when they let contracts, the insurance is so much money for these things that they may prefer not to have it as an item in the preliminaries for the contractor to carry that liability. They carry it on the insurance that they have. Now, if the issue in Petrotrin was one in which the contractors didn't carry insurance, it doesn't matter, because whoever gave them the commission to accept to sign off on that contract, they would have been liable to insure, and when they didn't ensure it was there, it could be implied that they will be carrying that insurance liability.
Yeah.
So they have that responsibility on their shoulders any which way.
Right. So you see what you're saying, sir, and I don't mean to bring you, but and you're making a good point, and this is the point we're making. Do not allow yourself to be deflected. Do not allow yourself to be deflected with all that. What it is, we are only supposing. That's why the Commission of Inquiry, you know why they ask for a Commission of Inquiry? I mean, governments all over the world do it. They do it all over the world because they say there are issues which the people have a right to know what happened, what went wrong, and more importantly, to be able to correct what went wrong. But the fact that the government does not want to release these commissions of inquiry, or does not appear or seems reluctant to do what is necessary to inform the public, where is the accountability, where is the transparency that they speak about? When the rubber hits the road, they are not prepared to do that, because it appears to me that they're more concerned about protecting their own selves. And if you had to just listen to the person in the chair of the Commission of Inquiry today, I mean, it was so condemning
okay,
of
let me
the
tell you
government.
another one very quickly.
Yes, caller, go ahead.
Now, for example, we are letting contracts on production sharing and exploration and production license. There's two philosophies on which the Petroleum Act allows anybody to enter the petroleum sector in the country.
Yeah.
But you have people going offshore to do exploration and production. And if there's a well blowout, like in Port Fuchsia in the Gulf, and Trinidad should suffer from something like that. These countries like the Gulf, they ensure that they have insurances to cover for and that is billions of dollars coverage. And it's not only the company have to carry that insurance through their head offices or the head owner of the company, call it that. So that's the first thing, right? Something that is happening in Trinidad that we need to. So when they jump up that somebody get a lease offshore, that is something we need to pay attention to as citizens, because you know there was a collision of two tankers in Trinidad, each one loaded with 400,000 barrels of crude. The name of the thing is the Aegean Express and the Pacific, not Princess. I think it's the Aegean Pacific and the Atlantic Empress. The article's still on the internet the last time I checked. So you could check for it and you'll see.
But why do we have to do that? Why isn't the government letting us know this? And that is what we're asking for, that transparency.
All right,
but we have a caller.
Yeah, we have another caller waiting. So.
All right, I just want to tell you one thing about Guyana.
Yeah, like 10 seconds.
Yeah, okay. Guyana comprises three territories. One that was owned, the Spanish had owned everything in the beginning in Latin America. And the one part of Guyana was owned after the British takeover from the Spanish. Another part was owned by the Dutch, adjoining the British Guyana. And another part was owned by the French, which is now French Guyana. Dutch Guyana is Suriname. Now, I have looked all over to see where what the British had handed over to as British Guyana had any change in the boundaries, and I found nothing.
Yeah.
I even went back to World War II, where Hitler did a set of studies for territorial separation and things, right? And I'm finishing here. Yeah. And I even uncovered where the U.S. and some of the European countries secretly stole them documents when they were packing away Hitler stuff. And, you know, those stuff.
You're wealth of knowledge, but Hitler's a person I don't want to. But we have a caller.
All right, caller.
Thank you very much for that information.
That is a point that, yes, it's not necessarily delved into with regards to the origin of this border disputes, you know, and of course, there's complexities, and we tend to put modern sensibilities on problems that happened well in the past, and we understand it's not quite the same. But we have a caller from St. Anne's that's been waiting for a while. Good morning, caller. You're on air.
Good morning to you and your guest.
Morning, morning.
I was a little disturbed to read in yesterday's newspaper that we haven't even yet gotten to the point of terms of reference for this inquiry into the TSTT debacle. I'm hoping that we're not being set up for another situation where it becomes long in the tail and eventually disappears from view and everybody forgets about it and goes home and on to the next thing. I'm hoping this is not that. I'm hoping that we get to some kind of serious investigation, but it doesn't bode well if we are 2 weeks out from the start of this inquiry based on what I read in the press yesterday. My second issue is this. I heard a suggestion made by the leader of the opposition that perhaps Trinidad and Tobago could play a mediator-like role in this thing between Guyana and Venezuela. And to my layman's ears, it didn't sound unreasonable given Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with Venezuela and Guyana and CARICOM. I was curious to know what your guest thought about that, being a former member of cabinet, if she felt that Trinidad and Tobago, the state, has a role to play or could play a role in this situation.
Okay, so to answer your question, and again I have to be careful, but I do think that Guyana has a far better relationship with Barbados, with Mia Motley. Well, one example is, from what I read on the Kaita News, that they're clearing the berths in order to offload the big ships in Barbados and unload them onto smaller ships and send them directly to Guyana rather than coming to Trinidad. I do know that our Prime Minister, early in the days of COVID, said that we had 465,000 COVID vaccinations, and when it was said that, well, Ghana had more, he said, oh, no, but they're not approved, and the advisor to the Minister of Health took great umbrage at that. I also do know that when, from my recollection, that when the first energy conference was called by Guyana, that our Prime Minister did not attend it, but he went to Europe. All I can tell you is that, and also when the whole issue about who won that elections, it did not seem, let us just say that it seemed like Mia Motley took the front line on that. And so in Trinidad and Tobago being a mediator, I'm not sure that the goodwill is there. For example, as I said earlier on, Dr. Ali has said, we don't want your refinery too old. We make it. We want one refinery, and we're getting it from the Dominican Republic. We don't want your train to 2, 3, and 4. It's too old. He also said we don't want to put any pipeline from Kaita because it's too costly. Read between the tea leaves, and I think that Trinidad and Tobago probably is not in the best position, or they may be trying now to do some damage control given the importance. And a last thing I just saw recently. Barbados has really been working together with Impacts, which is Interpol, etc., dealing with the drug trade. And apparently they got over 3-point-something tons of cocaine just recently, and they held 8 Venezuelans. So I just believe, and my impression is that Barbados and Guyana have a far better relationship than we have with them, and we have done a lot of damage to our own relation, so that we have a lot of work to do before we can take on the role of mediator. And that's just my point of view on it.
This is not like a divorce agreement or child custody or an inheritance dispute. It's one piece of land, and both sides are saying it's ours. And Minister Brown made this comment, but I myself had this thought even before reading his comments. And I don't think he necessarily went as far as I would go, right? Guyana, I don't think they want to mediate anything because what is there to mediate? Their position is Essequibo is ours, you can't have it, right? So what are you going to mediate then? What concessions could you possibly
The Port of
give?
Spain Protocol, remember, there was a Port of Spain Protocol, so there were efforts on Trinidad's part to do that.
But I think
already.
the other thing I said was the opposition MP basically implied that the government must mediate, and it's like, hold on, we need to be invited. We need to be invited to mediate.
She's playing politics.
Oh, no. The best part was an MP, one of the MPs said that, and then she came out later and said, stay out of Guyana to Maduro, right? So you're getting split messages from that side of the
Because
bench.
you know why? Because I am of the view, based on antecedents, and I may be wrong, and I am subject to being corrected, but Trinidad does not enjoy the best of relationships with Guyana based on the examples that I gave, but it does with Barbados, and as a consequence of which, the best person, and Mia Motley has been voted, I understand, the Prime Minister of the Caribbean. I read it somewhere. Do you wonder why? No, we don't wonder why. We don't wonder why. Maybe she doesn't say things that she shouldn't say. But in any event, I do believe, though, that this is what I understand, and of course, you asked me to, but I do believe I am correct, that both Mia Motley and the opposition leader do have a good relationship. I lived in Barbados for 4 years. And
this is our opposition leader.
Yes,
right.
Kamala. I do think they have a good relationship, and maybe if she was there, I don't know, maybe make a difference. But anyway, I'm not advocating for anybody. I just telling you that suggestion for Trinidad, I think our Prime Minister muddied these waters a lot. I think our Minister of Foreign Affairs is doing his best to kind of clean it up. But right now, Ghana is in the saddle, in the horse's saddle, and they're going to be there for a long time to come.
So Cole, I understand what you said. It sounds reasonable to mediate, but it's not so simple. We can't just interject ourselves in between a dispute of our neighbors.
And we were supporting the former president. The former president. It came across as though with the election.
But the last election, yeah.
Yes, so all of that ain't not a good look.
I also want to say that with regards to the TSCT thing, I believe the technical internal investigation was already happening. And now this is looking to do the external. Who did this? Why they did this?
They don't want us to know.
Like that.
They don't want us to know what happened with Nikon. They don't want us to know what happened with Paria. They don't want us to know what happened with TSCT, and they don't want us to know what happened with CL.
Minister Gonzalez get a 0.5% increase.
Following instructions.
Increase in believability from me. It's not much, but I am willing to give him that little bit more of the benefit. However, I will say this: I do believe what Karen just said there. He will eventually get instructions. Don't say what we don't want you to say.
Having been inside there, I could tell you is, you know, our Section 8 or whatever of our Constitution, that's the Westminster model. The Prime Minister is the boss.
Folks,
remember that.
I want to thank all the callers. Thank you, Karen, for coming on and engaging with your detailed commentary on this situation. That might even, one-up foreign news agencies with all their resources. How about that? That's for production. And folks, we're coming to a close. I guess I should just say, listen, complex problems need, well, not always complex solutions, but well thought out solutions.
And goodwill.
And goodwill, acting in good faith.
You need goodwill. You need goodwill.
And folks, this is just one more of those situations, and we have to question if we don't like how our response is, whether it's the Commission of Inquiry report,
all the commissions of inquiry.
All the commissions of inquiry not being, well, those that aren't released, the regional,
not to be released.
The regional issues, etc., the TSCT hack. We do have to ask, is the definition of insanity electing the same people and expecting different results? Maybe it is.
But what about the definition of accountability and transparency?
I don't know if we're well versed on those definitions in TSC. Folks, if we want to make it a great day, we need to start today. We could do so if we try, as my coach always says. And we will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
All right.
I'm Andy Johnson, and you're watching WESN, the content capital.
Have a content capital Christmas. It's the best time of the year. Now I know we have no snow, but Christmas is still here. Ho ho, the Christmas shows each week for all to see. Movie classics wait for you and our local content for free. Have a content capital Christmas, and in case you didn't hear, oh by golly, have a content capital Christmas this year.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokaram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
That in part due to the military movement? Has that blocked any new aid that could be sent in?
Unfortunately, whether during the ceasefire or before, there was never enough assistance going through Rafah to meet the huge needs of the population in Gaza. And now you have to think it's 1.8 million people now who are displaced. More are being again displaced. So we're having people who have been multiply displaced and don't feel safe anywhere. And the shelters are extremely precarious. And the humanitarian organizations like the International Committee of the Red Cross today just don't have enough supplies in terms of food, water, hygiene items. Access to health is becoming more and more limited. And humanitarians just don't have the necessary resources to be able to respond to these huge needs. So, of course, assistance needs to finally massively come in. But what we're also requesting is, to all parties, is the protection of civilians. And this is also linked to the conduct of hostilities, the way the fighting is going. And there are a few principles which must be respected, and this is really the obligations regarding international humanitarian law, is the principle of distinction, to distinguish between those who fight and those who are not fighting. And these are, of course, the civilians in Gaza. We are also thinking, of course, about the hostages. All these are the most vulnerable today and must be spared by the fighting which has resumed.
A new Amnesty International report claims that members of the Iranian security forces raped and used other forms of sexual violence against both women and men detained in the crackdown on nationwide protests that erupted last year following the death in police custody of Mahsa Amini. The group says that it documented 45 cases of rape, gang rape, or sexual violence, but believes that this is part of a wider pattern. Now, for more on this, we can speak to Diana El-Tahawi, Amnesty International's Deputy Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa. Diana, thank you for speaking to us. First of all, I'd like you to tell our viewers a little bit about the main findings of this report and how Amnesty International went about collecting those testimonies.
Yes, in the report issued today, Amnesty International exposes how Iranian security and intelligence forces have used rape, gang rape, and other forms of sexual violence as a weapon to crush the Women Life Freedom uprising that rocked Iran between September and December of last year. Amnesty International was able to document in detail the harrowing accounts of 45 survivors of rape and other forms of sexual violence, women, men and children as young as 12, who recounted to the organization how they were arrested in the context of protests, forcibly placed into vans by security and intelligence forces, and then taken to official or unofficial places of detention, including schools, warehouses, residential buildings that were unlawfully repurposed to commit these horrific acts. In addition to these 45 detailed cases that Amnesty documented, we heard accounts from survivors of rape and other sexual violence and other former detainees about additional cases of rape and other sexual violence committed in detention against scores of detainees. And this all shows that the crimes that we documented are not isolated, but they're part of a wider pattern. Despite all this, we have seen prosecutors and judges being complicit in this machinery of torture and other ill treatment, including rape and other forms of sexual violence. Prosecutors have dismissed or ignored or covered up complaints by survivors who courageously spoke to them or showed them their torture marks. They have shielded officials from prosecution.
Now, one of the things that struck me while reading the report was that many of the victims were men and boys. And of course, there's no surprise that in Iran, it is a society marked by gender-based violence. But the fact that those victims, a lot of them were men and boys, was that a surprise to you, or were you expecting this?
Amnesty International has a long investigated violations committed in the context of crackdowns on the multiple waves of protests that shook Iran from 2017. And we have long documented the systematic use of torture and other ill treatment. What was a surprise to us in the context of the Women Life Freedom uprising is the rise in reports of rape and other forms of sexual violence committed against women and girls, as well as men and boys. We have documented how protesters, regardless of their gender, were punished and intimidated because they went to the streets to call for the establishment of a new political system respecting human rights and non-discrimination, because they protested against forced veiling laws. And we have documented these cases, as I say, against children as young as 12, as well as men and boys.
And Amnesty International did share the results, the findings of this report with the Iranian authorities. Unsurprisingly, apparently you didn't get any response. What are you hoping about that will come of publishing this report?
Well, Amnesty International wants to shine a light on the horrific ordeals of protesters in Iran, and we want the international community to stand with survivors in their pursuit of justice. Given the systemic crisis of impunity in Iran and no prospects of accountability domestically, we ask that the international community supports efforts to achieve truth, justice, and reparation for survivors. And in this context, we're calling for the international community to support the extension of the mandate of the fact-finding mission in Iran, so it is able to pursue its investigations into crimes under international law and other gross human rights violations committed in the context of the protests. We are also calling on states to exercise universal jurisdiction to initiate criminal investigations against those suspected of responsibility in committing crimes under international law, with a view, if there is admissible evidence, of issuing international arrest warrants. Without the cycle of impunity being broken, we fear further bloodshed and we fear further horrific violations against people in Iran.
Diana El-Tahawi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Now, this year's Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to jailed Iranian activist Narges Mohammadi for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran and her fight to promote human rights and freedom for all. France 24 spoke to her husband, who expressed concern about her treatment in jail.
We are worried about the health of Narges. Since she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, she's been under even more pressure by the regime. When someone is in prison, they do not have the right to express themselves, neither on political nor on social issues. I hope this prize will help the voices of all the women in Iran to be heard.
Moving on to our science segment with Julia Seeger. We're talking about methane, which is relatively unknown as a gas to the general public, at least, and it's taking center stage at COP28. Its elimination relatively straightforward in its process, and it could significantly save time in the race against climate change. Methane not discussed as much as CO2 emissions, for example, despite it being a gas that contributes heavily to global warming.
Indeed. You know, if you have heard of methane, you tend to just associate it to cow belching and cow flatulation, but it is indeed the second most important greenhouse gas to contribute to global warming after CO2. So it's not as prevalent in the atmosphere, but it has a potential to a global warming potential 30 times higher than CO2. So you can see it here, methane in green and CO2 in blue. Now, of the 580 million annual tons of methane that are emitted in the atmosphere, you have about half, let's say 40% of it that's directly linked to natural phenomenons and 60% to human activity. If we zoom in on human-induced methane, then 1/3 of it is actually released by the energy sector during coal extraction, for instance, but also from leaks from gas and oil drilling and pipelines. Now, the rest is actually due to agriculture and to cows, but also to rice paddies and the decomposition of waste. Now, Kitavan, there's a lot of things we could do in all of these domains, of course, to reduce methane emissions, but there's actually one domain in which we can act swiftly and see the results, and that's by addressing the leaks that I was just talking about, the leaks that appear when we drill for gas and along those major pipelines of oil companies in the world.
And up till now, there wasn't really a way to quantify those methane leaks, but things have changed.
That's right. We knew that we had those methane leaks, but we didn't know how important and what the extent of the problem was. And thanks to space technology and satellites specifically, we're now able to have more data. And that started in 2017 after ESA's launch of the Copernicus Sentinel P5 satellite, which started scanning the Earth to try to understand the quality of the air. And that started giving more information to many startups. And last week, a French startup by the name of Kairos unveiled an interactive map where you can really track what we call the super emitters of methane from 2019 to today. And what it really shows is a correlation between those leaks and the pipelines. So for the first time now, you have those oil companies that really can't deny anymore what's happening and the extent of it. You also have NASA that's developed a high-tech sensor that they installed on the International Space Station in 2022. And here it's quite incredible. You have an incredible resolution. You can detect mega leaks. And it almost seems you're going to see it on this picture. It's a leak in Texas. You're almost only 60 feet above ground, above this this methane leak.
And we are interested in this because it's easy, apparently, to reduce those methane leaks.
That's
How
right.
is that possible?
Well, according to the International Energy Agency, we could reduce 75% of those leaks thanks to very inexpensive technologies. Today we have leak detection systems. We also have repair equipment that is propelled by AI that can also help. And so if you take 3% of the revenues accumulated by oil and gas companies worldwide, that would give enough money to be able to get rid of all of the methane. So of course at COP28, you have a lot, the US for instance has unveiled a roadmap of how to reduce those emissions. You also have 50 major oil and gas companies who have really signed this charter to bring down those emissions to almost close to zero by 2030. But we've seen in the past, you know, some similar promises, so we'll have to wait and see to see if they actually fall through this time.
Julia Seeger with our science segment. Thanks so much. And we're turning now to today's focused report. We head to Belgium, where a documentary about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church has caused shock and soul-searching. Its revelations have reignited a debate about funding for religion in the country. Unlike a neighboring France, with its strict secularism, the Belgian state finances officially recognized religions. There are currently 6, with a 7th, Buddhism, to be added to the list soon. And historically, the system has favored the Catholic Church, but the sexual abuse scandal has triggered calls for change. This report from Alix Le Bourdon with Chris Moore.
After Mass, the priest took us in his arms to thank us, to give us a hug. Then things got worse.
It happened more than 50 years ago, but Mark's wounds are still with him. As a child, he was sexually abused by the local priest. Even today, returning to the scene remains difficult.
I can still feel everything that happened before, even if it was 50 years ago. Now I can't bring myself to go into the church.
His abuser was a member of the clergy paid by the state, because, unlike many European countries, Belgium provides public funding for religions. Mark says the system needs reform.
The situation disgusts me, because someone who is found guilty of violent, abusive acts, he gets punished, but we shouldn't continue paying them.
Especially not by the state.
Especially not the state.
It's a debate Rick de Ville would also like to see reopened. The retired priest was one of the first to sound the alarm bell over abuse within the Catholic Church. In the wake of a documentary in which victims spoke out, he's received dozens of new testimonies.
When I was 12 or 13 years old, I was a victim of a priest. There, he mentions the name.
As well as talking about their trauma, some victims also criticise the Belgian system.
It's very painful for the victims. It's as if the Belgian authorities are subsidizing the authors of these crimes. The system of funding, the way the Belgian church and priests are paid, absolutely has to be reformed. We're not in the Middle Ages. This can't go on any longer.
The Belgian state may fund religions, but it has little influence on their institutions. No means, for example, of dismissing a priest guilty of acts of paedophilia. In the wake of the recent scandal, all the Ministry of Justice could do was ask the church to remove such people from the list of those paid by the state.
A few months ago, I heard that there were still around 10 people whose files needed evaluation,
A certain number of people are also in the process of leaving the priesthood, saying to themselves that they cannot continue there. We have to find a way to say to people, I think you need to withdraw completely. The priesthood isn't for you. And this is all happening.
The Catholic Church accounts for 85% of the Belgian public funds dedicated to religions. This Member of Parliament belongs to the Commission of Inquiry set up following the scandal. He's well aware the state's relationship to faith is back in the spotlight.
The way we recognize religion can pose a problem. For some religions, such as Catholicism, which is the historic religion of Belgium, funding relates to the number of people who live in a municipality rather than the number of people who actually practice the religion or the way the population actually thinks.
As a result, the way the Catholic Church is funded has remained unchanged despite shrinking congregations. Amid the latest revelations about sexual abuse by the priesthood, some Belgians have even decided to be debaptized.
Here we need to indicate the diocese to which we're addressing the letter.
This bar owner offers to help his customers with the paperwork. For Kathleen, it's a symbolic gesture.
More people and more politicians, because in the end they're the ones who make the decisions, need to see that this is not normal for religion and its institutions to get money for free.
Legally, it won't mean the church getting fewer resources, but maybe change will eventually come.
In just a few weeks, dozens of people have already come to Steve for help.
It's about opening up the debate on how we treat religion, to move towards secularization, where people have an individual right to believe. It's about how we can organize the separation of church and state in a healthy way.
Defenders of the Belgian system say it allows the authorities to keep an eye on religions, a point often raised in the wake of the 2016 Islamist attacks in Brussels. But this specialist says that argument only goes so far.
Belgium has resolutely committed to providing financial support for Islamic worship, with this idea that it would promote a democratic Islam. An absence of any real control entrusted to public authorities has, however, made it very complicated.
Some say the rules need to change so the level of financial support reflects the number of people actually practicing a religion. It's a path taken by neighbouring Luxembourg, but the Catholic Church there is now in serious financial difficulty.
And this wraps up this hour of Live from Paris. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with more news after a quick break.
Follow our international journalists on France 24. Douglas Herbert, Angela Diffley, Robert Parsons, Philip Turl, and Armand Georgian. From the newsroom to the studio or live on air, they are on standby 24/7 to analyze world events. Whether tackling historic, geopolitical, economic, or environmental issues, our experts get to the heart of the biggest international news stories. They contribute to our special reports and scour the headlines for information. Follow it live. Follow the news. Follow France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly. On The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.
Israeli forces are in Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, and engaged in street battles against Hamas militants in some of the most intense fighting since the war began 2 months ago. G7 leaders are meeting virtually today with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in a show of support for the country's war against Russia. And Russian President Vladimir Putin is on a rare trip abroad. He's set to hold meetings with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia to discuss the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and oil production. Hello and welcome to France 24. I'm Ketavan Gorjestani. We start, of course, in Israel and specifically in Gaza, with Israeli troops having reached the heart of Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip, and where they have been fighting fierce ground battles with Hamas. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes have also continued across the Strip, and one of the heaviest fighting since Israel began its military campaign to eliminate Hamas 2 months ago. Earlier, I spoke to our Jerusalem correspondent, Iris Makler, about the latest from the Israeli offensive.
I can tell you that both sides confirmed that this is very intensive fighting. It's fighting on 3 fronts, because while Israeli troops have moved into Khan Yunis in the south, they are still fighting in the north of the Gaza Strip, basically or mostly in Sajaiya and Jabalia. That continues in the north of the Gaza Strip. Israel says it has chalked up some successes and has found the largest weapons cache of all the time, of all its entire ground offensive so far, short and long range missiles, and they've published photos of those. They say they are also eliminating Hamas commanders, and that in Khan Yunis, a town that they associate with the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, it's where he grew up after all, they have surrounded his house, where he is no longer to be found. I guess it's a symbolic gesture of some kind, symbolic military gesture, but he is either under the ground or perhaps even out of Gaza now, you know, under the ground in Sinai, let's say. But in any event, that is all, I guess, on the Israeli side. The Palestinians, that is Hamas in Gaza, also say, the military wing say they are fighting more, and perhaps it is because they have retreated, if you like, from Gaza, from the north of Gaza to Khan Yunis, and that's why they're fighting there. Fighting there is more difficult because there are so many civilians who have not left their homes. The UN estimates now that there's 80% of the Gaza Strip's population has moved somewhere, and I guess these last people are either don't want to move because they came from the north to the south, they've put themselves into Khan Yunis, they don't want to move again, or they're people who live in Khan Yunis and think there's nowhere else safe in the Gaza Strip, so they're not moving. And that means, of course, that there's going to be a higher civilian death toll and a higher death toll amongst Israeli soldiers as well. I think it's important to say that they have lost almost 100 soldiers since this offensive, this ground offensive began.
Moving on now to the war in Ukraine, G7 leaders are set to hold a virtual meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky later today. This after Zelensky unexpectedly canceled a scheduled virtual meeting with U.S. lawmakers on a Tuesday. Ukrainian officials, meanwhile, making the rounds in person on Capitol Hill, insisting on the need to keep funds and arms flowing to Kyiv. The White House has warned that U.S. funding for the war in Ukraine could run out by the end of the year, but the cash has been held up by Republicans in Congress who are demanding concessions on security measures at the U.S.-Mexico border. Earlier, our correspondent Gulliver Crack sent us this about why Zelensky might have skipped the briefing with U.S. senators.
Rustem Umerov, the defense minister, who is part of the delegation that's in Washington at the moment from Ukraine, said simply, it's a war, things happen. That was in an interview with Fox News, suggesting that the reason was something on the Ukrainian side that came up. But analysts think it's probably more likely that it was the Ukrainians' analysis of the situation in the United States that made it seemed to Zelensky perhaps not very useful for him to speak to the Senate yesterday. It was reported that the meeting, which was behind closed doors, was extremely rowdy, a lot of disputes between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the chance that today this package of aid for Ukraine might not be voted even in the Senate. People were thinking that the Senate would pass it and that the difficulties would come in the House. So clearly the American political situation is very, very difficult. As one Ukrainian columnist put it, it's a bit like if you're at dinner with a couple who are having a screaming row. You really can't do anything to influence the situation. It's probably best to just keep silent. I think that's the feeling among Ukrainians at the moment, that perhaps there's not really very much the president can do. They're all very worried about it, but they do also know that advocating for this aid to Ukraine are the president of the United States, Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, people very, very high up in America, and they're perhaps better placed actually to try to convince the rest of the American political class than another intervention from Volodymyr Zelensky, who can really only repeat the same arguments that people have heard again and again and again about why it's absolutely necessary for Ukraine to have this aid from the United States to avoid Russia essentially being rewarded for its unprovoked aggression, with all of the implications that that could have for the future of international security.
Kyiv says the Russian shelling on Tuesday killed 3 people in the southern Kherson region. Deadly Russian attacks there have become routine since the Ukrainian army regained control of it last year, with civilian deaths reported almost daily. Battles there and elsewhere in the country continuing as winter approaches, and with no sign of any end to the conflict. Nick Rushworth tells us more.
The aftermath of an attack. Ukrainian authorities reported deaths by Russian shelling in the southern city of Kherson. They are the latest fatalities in months of persistent shelling by Moscow's forces. Kherson's military administration released this footage of damaged buildings and bodies lying in the street.
The shelling lasted for almost 2 hours. It was in Kherson, in the center of the city. As a result, 2 people died, one woman, 33 years old, and a man, 46 years old.
Ukrainian forces recaptured Kherson just over a year ago, but it remains targeted by Russian forces on the opposite side of the Dnipro River that runs next to the city. With the war continuing on multiple fronts in Ukraine and with no end in sight, Ukrainians are bracing themselves for winter. In a village in the Mykolaiv region, northwest of Kherson, many of the buildings are in ruins. One resident, though, is trying to fix what he can to his house to have shelter from the cold.
I hope it can be rebuilt. The foundations are fine and some of the walls are okay, but specialist professionals need to look at it.
Russia's full-scale invasion began in February 2022. The Ukrainian army and civilians are facing a second full winter of war.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is on a rare trip abroad, stopping in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia to discuss oil production, OPEC Plus, and the wars in the Gaza Strip and Ukraine. Putin arriving in Abu Dhabi for talks with President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and he will then be traveling to Saudi Arabia to meet with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a first face-to-face meeting with MBS since the fall of 2019. For more on this, let's cross live to our correspondent Nick Holzworth joining us from Jeddah. Nick, you also used to be our correspondent in Russia. What do you make of Putin's trip, a rare trip abroad for the Russian president?
This is indeed a rare trip. It's only the third overseas trip since the war in Ukraine was launched by Russia in February 2022, with trips to Iran and China before this trip. This is all about Putin seeking to project an image of confidence. In fact, he's been speaking far more confidently in recent weeks as the Russians have perceived the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the east of Ukraine. And this visit is all about discussing oil, showing his partners in the Middle East that he's a reliable partner, seeking to agree a cut in oil production in order to keep prices up, although they have actually fallen recently. Keeping the oil price high is important for Putin because that means he's earning more overseas revenue to pay for his war in Ukraine. And also he's seeking to have an influence on the war in Gaza, having just a few years ago sided with the Syrian president in his civil war, which tipped the balance in favor of the Syrian president in that war.
Now, besides the wars both in Ukraine and in Gaza, Putin expected, as you mentioned, to discuss oil production. What is the Russian president hoping to get out of these meetings when it comes to oil production?
Well, he's certainly hoping to agree a cut in production, which will mean higher oil prices for the Russians. And he's hoping to show that Russia is a reliable partner who can work in concert with OPEC Plus countries in the region.
Nick Holzworth reporting there from Jeddah. Thanks so much. Following Venezuela's controversial referendum on Sunday on the fate of the disputed oil-rich region of Essequibo, President Maduro has proposed a bill to declare a region that currently makes up two-thirds of neighboring country Guyana as a Venezuelan province. Lisa Kamenoff has the details.
President Maduro stood in front of a galvanized government pledging to launch Venezuelan oil and mine development in the oil-rich region of Essequibo and asking Guyanese companies to withdraw their operations from the area. He also suggested a bill be sent to the National Assembly for the creation of Guyana Essequibo, a new state in the region.
Let's immediately proceed with the granting of operating licenses for the exploration and exploitation of oil, gas and mines in the entire area of our Guyana Essequibo. Under the special law, I propose to give all Guyanese companies 3 months to withdraw from their operations in the sea. 3 months.
This comes after Caracas's referendum on Sunday, where according to officials it had a 50% voter turnout, of which 95% of voters were in favor of claiming sovereignty over the region. The 160,000 square kilometer region has been a disputed territory between Venezuela and Guyana for over a century. But Venezuela's interest in the area peaked after the discovery of offshore oil and gas in 2015. Essequibo makes up two-thirds of neighboring Guyana, which produces 400,000 barrels of oil and gas per day. In a statement on Tuesday, Guyanese president denounced Maduro's actions.
This is a direct threat to Guyana's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence.
Guyana warned Venezuela that it would turn to the UN Security Council for help should any further moves be made.
Now, a British singer and songwriter and guitarist Denny Lane has died at the age of 79. He was a member of the Moody Blues, for which he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He was also Paul McCartney's longtime sideman in Wings, the former Beatle calling him, quote, a great talent with a fine sense of humor. His death comes almost exactly 50 years after the release of McCartney's Band on the Run album, on which Lane played a guitar and provided backing vocals. And some good news for the Swifties of the world. Time magazine naming U.S. pop icon Taylor Swift as its Person of the Year. The Time editor-in-chief Sam Jacobs writing in a statement, quote, Taylor Swift found a way to transcend borders and be a source of light. Swift is the rare person who is both the writer and the hero of her own story. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching. Do stay tuned for more news coming up on France 24.
Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters on France 24. Coming up on this week's edition. Panic, fear and anxiety as Israel widens its offensive into southern Gaza and orders residents to evacuate Khan Yunis. The UN warns that Palestinians have nowhere left to go and that hospitals are close to breaking point. Fresh criticism of the Emirati oil executive and president of the COP28 after Sultan Al Jaber questions the need to phase out fossil fuels. And almost a year after millions were made homeless by the earthquake that killed over 50,000 people in Turkey and Syria, olive producers in one of the worst affected regions are fighting back as authorities move farmers from their lands to make way for new housing. First, the World Health Organization is warning that the humanitarian situation is worsening by the hour as Israel widens its offensive into southern Gaza. Doctors at the largest hospital there say it's being overwhelmed with the number of dead and wounded and may soon be forced to stop functioning. Thousands of displaced Palestinians are seeking shelter there as Israel orders residents to move from Khan Yunis to Rafah, but they say they have simply nowhere to go. Shirley Sitbon has more.
The word overcrowded is not close to describing the situation in the hospitals of the Gaza Strip. This is Khan Yunis, where tens of thousands have fled to escape Israel's deadly operation against Hamas. As the city gets more dense by the hour, and as the Israeli army gets closer, its Al Nasser hospital is flooded with wounded patients. People with serious injuries are treated on the floor.
They treat patients properly since the day they get in. May God help these doctors. Given the fact that they are doing their job with the existing lack of medicine, equipment, and tools, frankly, this is the best they can do with the limited resources they have available at the moment.
Some patients have seen their injuries complicated because they could not be treated in time.
We're receiving cases of serious injuries that require amputations, neurosurgery, general surgery. Especially in the past 4 days, most of the admitted cases went into general surgery, neurosurgery, and other cases that were transferred to the European hospital for surgeries.
Conditions in hospitals are described by international organizations as dramatic, and they all denounce attacks on medical facilities and call to protect hospitals and civilians.
We need more support for this people, and we need the war to stop, ceasefire. I wish, because nobody will win in this war.
On top of the wounds, the acute shortage in everything that is vital, starting with clean water, has brought more infectious diseases. respiratory infections and diarrhea, something doctors don't have the time or means to treat.
Time is running out, say the families of the 137 hostages still being held captive in Gaza. They're demanding regular meetings with the Israeli War Cabinet and assurances that freeing their loved ones remains a priority as Israel steps up its ground offensive. It comes as some of the hostages released during the 7-day truce with Hamas have been outlining the abuse they suffered in captivity.
A hero's welcome for the two siblings. The crowd celebrates their release after 2 months in captivity. Maya, 21, and her brother Itai, 18, finally returned to their home in the north of Tel Aviv. They were kidnapped at the Nova Music Festival, just as they were trying to flee. Their loved ones relentlessly called for their release.
When they were held hostage, we took part in all the protests in the square. We followed the case. We supported their family. The moment we've all been waiting for has finally arrived. They're here, safe and sound. Now, we await the return of Omer, their friend.
Their friend is one of the 137 hostages still held in Gaza. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came to an end on Friday, and the hopes of seeing the hostages again are fading. In Tel Aviv, families accuse the Israeli government of ignoring them.
I want you to look into my eyes. It could have been your own children. At a party, at home, anywhere. Would you have waited 59 days to bring them home? Look us in the eye. These are our children, our families. Where are you? Where are you?
They urge Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do everything in his power to resume negotiations with Hamas. So far, 105 people have been freed during the 7-day truce. These families are determined to put more pressure on the government to get their loved ones back.
He's claiming that his remarks were misinterpreted. The Emirati oil executive leading the COP28 climate conference in Dubai has come out fighting after widespread criticism of his suggestion that there was no science indicating that a phase-out of fossil fuels was needed to contain global warming. A controversial choice as president, Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE's environment minister and CEO of its state-run oil firm, argues that he is uniquely placed to persuade the industry to buy into a green energy future, as Charlotte Hughes explains.
His supporters say he's a realist, but his appointment as COP28 president has drawn fierce criticism. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber holds a number of high positions in the United Arab Emirates. In 2006, he founded Masdar, the UAE's renewable energy company. But he is also the chief executive of the UAE state oil company, ADNOC, which many view as a serious conflict of interest with his COP presidency.
The oil and gas industry made a mistake in overreaching and naming the CEO of one of the largest and one of the dirtiest, by many measures, oil companies in the world as the president of the COP.
Since becoming COP28 president, Jaber has been at the centre of a string of controversies. Last week, the BBC reported that leaked briefing documents revealed plans by the UAE to use its role as the host of the UN climate talks as an opportunity to strike oil and gas deals. The documents include talking points which suggest telling a number of countries ADNOC wants to work with their governments to develop fossil fuel projects. Jaber denies using such talking points in discussions. Days later, a leaked video showed him declaring that no science says a fossil fuel phase-out will help achieve climate goals.
There is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase-out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5.
Comments that have sparked a wave of concern from scientists and activists. Jaber said his comments had been misinterpreted. He insists that his experience as an oil boss increases his ability to leverage solutions.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan made bold promises in the aftermath of the pre-dawn earthquake that killed more than 50,000 people in Turkey and Syria, flattening entire towns and leaving millions homeless. The government pledged to build more than 300,000 homes within a year, but 10 months on, less than a quarter of them have been constructed. In some of the worst-hit villages, anger is mounting as olive farmers are being forced to leave their lands, which have been rezoned for housing. From Digicel in the Hatay region, our correspondents sent this report.
It's harvest season in Digicel.
All the memories, all the past that we have with these trees. We don't know what will happen in the future.
Jaffer was born in Digicel, a village close to the city of Antakya in southern Turkey. Like his father, his grandfather and his great-grandfather, he has spent his entire life growing olive trees. But now his livelihood is at risk.
The olive trees are the only source of income in our town. The people of our town, all of our farmers, this is our only source of income. And now, after these expropriations, we really doubt how we'll be able to make a living.
Not long after the February 6th earthquake, Jaffer and the other residents of Digicel discovered that their land would be seized by the state to make way for new housing units. Activists, however, say that the soil here is unfit for construction and warn for the project's social and ecological consequences.
They are destroying the farming fields and are even constructing in neighborhoods that were 100% destroyed during the earthquake. The ground there is soft. We as the people of Digicel are opposed to all this, and will continue to be so, because all this is being done in an unfair and illegal manner.
The people in this village are Alevis, a religious minority often at loggerheads with the Turkish government. So far, their protests have been met with a growing police presence. But today, the atmosphere is festive, as residents have just learned that the local court has backed their case and ordered construction to be suspended.
We made a huge effort and it took a lot of pain from the townsmen of Digicel. But now we are very happy with this result. With this decision, we will not allow not even a single olive tree to be cut down.
Despite the court's decision, however, buildings in and around Digicel continue to go up at full speed. But the residents here say they are determined to keep on fighting for their olive trees.
Built in honour of the architect who's credited with creating the very first pyramid, Egypt's Imhotep Museum has reopened its doors to the public following months of renovation works. It contains hundreds of artefacts, including the world's oldest complete royal mummy, which dates from the year 2292 BC. Well, that is it from this week's edition of Middle East Matters. Do stay with us for more world news here on France 24.
France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. Follow our international journalists on France 24. Douglas Herbert, Angela Diffley, Robert Parsons, Philip Turle, and Armand Georgian. From the newsroom to the studio or live on air, they are on standby 24/7 to analyze world events. Whether tackling historic, geopolitical, economic or environmental issues, our experts get to the heart of the biggest international news stories. They contribute to our special reports and scour the headlines for information. Follow it live. Follow the news. Follow France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
The civil war in Sudan has signed the end of a short democratic interlude, and it's having dramatic consequences in the Darfur region. The Rapid Support Forces, mainly Arabs, are opposed to the regular army. They openly attack members of the Black Masalit ethnic group in a grim replay of the 2003 conflict. Are we heading towards a new 21st century genocide? Watch Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Israeli forces are in Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, and engaged in street battles against Hamas militants in some of the most intense fighting since the war began 2 months ago. G7 leaders are meeting virtually today with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in a show of support for the country's war against Russia. And Russian President Vladimir Putin is on a rare trip abroad. He's set to hold meetings with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia to discuss the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and oil production. Hello and welcome to France 24. I'm Ketavan Gorjestani. We start, of course, in Israel and specifically in Gaza, with Israeli troops having reached the heart of Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip, and where they have been fighting fierce ground battles with Hamas. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes have also continued across the Strip, and one of